Welcome to the Brown Bag Lunch Lecture presented by Belmont Village Senior Living, featuring writer-historian Rusty Williams. He will share stories from his most recent book, Texas, Loud, Proud, and Brash. Williams is the author of 5 nonfiction books and numerous magazine and journal articles. A former newspaper writer, he's written for the Dallas Morning News, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and the Associated Press. Please join me in welcoming Rusty Williams to the Dallas Historical Society.
Thank you. Good to have you here. They've invested a lot of money in a new sound system, and I am learning how to use it. So if you don't hear me well, if I start to mumble or I turn away, then please let me know, and maybe I'll back up, maybe I won't, but we'll see. I'll get right to the point here. I got something just recently from a friend that I want to show you. You know, all the talk about Texas seceding and so on. It really kind of hurt my feelings. And honestly, when I go to other states to talk about a book, there's always somebody who comes up to me and says, Rusty, you Texas people you just look down on everybody. And again, I got to say that isn't true. We don't look down on everybody. We just don't look up to anybody. And it's true. You know, we've got an attitude. We're known for being a little bit different here in Texas, being loud, proud, and brash, as a matter of fact. And it's well earned. People think we're exaggerating. In fact, they think that we have no relation to the truth. We do. We respect the truth an awful lot, which is why we use it so sparingly. And one of the things we enjoy talking about is Texas. Every time I go out of state, there are 3 things that people always want to bring up, and one is Texas weather. The other is Texas size, and third is the state legislature. And let me start with the weather. We know just how strange the weather can be here. We've experienced over the last couple of years. In fact, who here is from Texas? And who has been here less than a year? Well, see, everybody's passport's good. Everybody's Texan. That's good. You know, we know what the weather's like. West Texas, windy, just will it'll blow an anchor chain horizontal there, and it's constant. You ask somebody in West Texas, tell me, does it always blow like this? They say no. Sometimes turns around, blows the other way. And people in East Texas, they enjoy the big piney woods. They take care of them. You go to a little town meeting and somebody asks, how did we protect those who did anything to protect those piney woods recently? And there'll be somebody go, well, I shot a woodpecker. And it's okay. We know how to take care. Drought is always something we need to worry about. We've had rain recently, but their area is so dry that sometimes the trees chase the dogs. It's very. You go in South Texas down the valley and you ask, you get much rain here? He says, well, you remember that in the Bible 40 days and 40 nights it rained? He said, we got about 2.5 inches out of that one. So the weather, and Texas size, goodness. You know, it doesn't take much exaggeration to think how big we are as a state. Actually, Texas takes up 1/8 of the landmass of the U.S. We got more land we got more non-glacier land than any other state of the union. Texas is so large that the settlers, when they came in, there was a wagon that came in through Texarkana. The woman in the wagon had just had a little baby boy. By the time the wagon got to El Paso, that boy was rolling his own cigarettes. It's a big place. And when you talk about something just as exceptional as that, it just seems like you're exaggerating or lying. Now, the state legislature, I can't speak for. They say that in West Texas, they rope a bull. In Mexico, they fight a bull. In Austin, they shoot the bull. But the oldest joke, the oldest state legislature joke is the woman who elbows her husband at night, wakes him up, says, "Honey, there's some burglars in the house." He says, "No burglars in the house. There are crooks in the house. The burglars are in the Senate." So enough of that. We've got a reputation. Admit it or not, we've got a reputation. But it hadn't always been that way. And that is, let me introduce you to a young man. Young man in 1920, a Dallas man, was admitted to Amherst College. And it was really special that he got invited to one of the high-end Eastern schools. His dad, they had a little bit of money. His dad took him out, bought him suits, bought him custom shirts, nice neckties to fit in at a prestigious Eastern school. When he got there, though, he didn't fit in. In fact, they were pretty. They humiliated him away. Have you ever seen the Red Indians? Yeah, no, he really never had. Well, how about cows? You got cows on your ranch? No, we live down on Ross Avenue. You take a stagecoach to school? Now we got a driver that takes us there. They had no idea what Texas was really like. And he wrote his parents. He said, much the same state of ignorance is around everywhere. In fact, in the 1920s, most people in the country, if they thought of Texas at all, thought of it as nothing but cattle, cowboys, and cactus. But it changed. By 1950, magazines were falling all over each other to come to Texas to write about Texas sports teams, Texas beauties, Texas oil millionaires. It was people were fascinated with Texas. They would talk about the annoying Texan who brags to everybody else, but and that's I asked myself, what happened between, say, 1925 and 1950 to change the national perception? Why are we thought of that way, and how did it happen so quickly? Well, the result was the book, Texas Loud, Proud, and Brash. And what I did was identify 10 individuals, 10 mavericks, who during that period of time, short period of time, gained the national attention by their actions, their achievements, or their words, and made an impression on the rest of the country. And as a result, we got a new, that impression of Texas has percolated into the culture as it stands still today, of being loud, proud, and brash. Now I'm going to introduce you quickly those 10 people, and I'm going to give you a brief summary of what they did. Some of them you're going to know, some of them you're not. So let's start with a man named Boyce House. Anybody here heard of Boyce House? Not? Okay, good for you, good. Boyce House was a writer he was a newspaper writer, he was a columnist, he had a radio column, but in 1920, he was editor of the Oil Belt Daily Journal in Eastland, Texas. 100 miles west of Fort Worth. In Eastland, they had just had a huge oil boom. And Boyce took over as editor of the paper and covered that oil boom. He became fascinated by the oil business and was there for another 10 years before he went to work for the Star-Telegram. But while he was making his rounds in that town, the old courthouse was the courthouse of Eastland County was way outdated. They were doing too many transactions, leasing, oil leasing and so on, oil leases and so on. So they're going to replace the courthouse. Boyce talks to some old timers that are kind of sitting around. One of them says, well, wonder if that horned frog's still alive. Boyce said, what horned frog? What are you talking about? He said, well, when they built this courthouse, the one they're going to tear down 31 years ago, my son and I were here for the cornerstone laying, and he had a little horned frog that he dropped into the cornerstone right before it was sealed. And they said that horned frogs live 100 years. They can hibernate for 100 years with no water, no nothing. Really? And Boyce finds that fascinating. He doesn't know about horned frogs. He writes the story about that. And here's where technology came along. It was one of the small newspapers that had a wire service. That story about the possibility of a horned frog in a cornerstone living for 30 years went out nationally, and people went nuts over the story. They couldn't believe it was passed around, it was traded. They went nuts. By the time they were going to be tearing down the courthouse and getting to the old cornerstone, there were 4,000 people gathered that Saturday morning in the town square of Eastland to see if that horned frog actually was living. Well, they set up a platform, and there he is. They set up a platform, and on that platform were three men. There was a minister, there was a city official, there was an oil company executive, and the sealed cornerstone was brought up and put in front of them. I mean, people saw it chipped out of the wall, put in front of them, and they peeled off the lead cover of it. The minister looked in, kind of went, and the crowd just goes, oh. But the mayor puts his hand in, pulls it out, and it's the kind of limp gray body of a horned frog. And again, the crowd's kind of, and about that time, one of its legs begins to quiver, and it takes a deep breath, and he hands it over to the other guy. He lives. The horned frog has been resurrected. He is there. The minister goes crazy about it. And there is the living horned frog after 31 years in the, people went nuts. They trampled toward the platform, would have flattened the poor horned frog if it hadn't gotten into a box and been shuffled away. But there was no question, according to the witnesses, that horned frog came out of that cornerstone and it was alive. Well, they put the frog, who they named Old Rip, by the way, named after Rip Van Winkle. They put Old Rip in a fishbowl and put him in the window of the pharmacy, and people lined up for days to walk through that window to see that horned frog. It was, ladies and gentlemen, this is a true story. This is true. Old Rip lived, he was a great tourist attraction, and when the town fathers of Eastland County decided to make a lobbying trip to Washington, they thought, because of all the publicity, that they'll take Old Rip along. So they take Old Rip in his fishbowl, along with a horned frog for every one of the other United States senators, and they call on their senator in Washington, and he's fascinated by it. He says, wait a minute. And he picks up the phone, kind of makes a quick call, says, tell you what, you take Old Rip down to the street outside there In about 5 minutes, there's going to be a car coming by before you get into it. They do. They get into this black kind of limo thing, and it drives them to the White House. Cal Coolidge, Silent Cal, wants to see old Rip. So they're ushered into the president's office, and Cal Coolidge doesn't say anything. He just kind of looks, pokes at it once or twice just to be sure it's alive, and then says, "Amazing." The Horned Frog said nothing. So it became such a big deal nationwide, this Horned Frog, this long life, that there was eventually an Old Rip coffee, the brand of Old Rip coffee. Its motto was, "Wake up." And there was an Old Rip cigarette, and there was an Old Rip chocolate bar that was made. Look for the Horned Frog on the label. So people loved Old Rip. And today, if you were to get, and it started with those stories by Boyce House, who earned his reputation. It was the biggest story of the year, even greater than Lindbergh's second trip around the world. Boyce House was one of the folks. Another was Tom Hickman. I doubt you would know the name unless you're really involved with the Texas Rangers. In 1931, in Oklahoma, in 1931, Texas and Oklahoma armed up and went to war over a 2-bit toll bridge across the Red River. There were Texas Rangers guarding the South Bank, Oklahoma National Guardsmen, true story, Oklahoma National Guardsmen threatening on the North Bank. Traffic between the two cities was shut down for 2 weeks, and it wasn't even about football. Now, it had to do with an argument over a over a toll bridge versus a free bridge there, and the governor had to call up the Texas Rangers. Now, to have a second war between the states is the way newspaper people termed it, was a great newsworthy opportunity. And they flocked to the Red River Bridge War. It made headlines nationally. In fact, the governor of Oklahoma came down to inspect his troops on the battle line. Of course, newspaper people were there, but also a new type of media showed up, and that was a newsreel cameraman. There were newsreel cameramen from Pathé and Fox Movietone News who were there, and they were fascinated by the Texas Rangers. Everybody had thought Texas Rangers were their impression of Texas Rangers was those scruffy old guys from the Texas-Mexican War, or slick guy from movies with the pioneer shirt and the tie around his neck. That wasn't Texas Rangers in 1931 at all. Texas Rangers, the rest of the country saw more like that. They were sharp-looking guys. They carried Tommy guns. They didn't ride horses. If they had needed a horse, they had it in a trailer behind their Packard. They were, true enough, when they camped out, they had a camper that they would stay in, and they camped in that camper on the south side of the river. But and Tom Hickman was the company commander there, Company B, and he was slick as could be. He had a smile that is said was the last thing that some bad criminals saw. That smile on Tom Hickman's face, killing smile. But the newsreels showed him, and all of a sudden, people got a different idea. The Texas Rangers weren't some ragtag folks. They were the next thing to like Mounties, well-dressed, good-looking, and sharp, especially when they were carrying those machine guns. Now, during the rest of the 30s, as folks like Alvin Karpus and Pretty Boy Floyd and John Dillinger raged through the states north of Texas, they didn't come into Texas. Some people said it was because of the reputation of the Rangers. Now, Bonnie and Clyde, who weren't the smartest tools in the drawer, but sharp as knives in the drawer, they ranged around Texas, and you know what they got. So, at any rate, this gave a new outlook to the Texas Rangers. They were modern, and they were a good police force. Let me introduce you to another woman you may have heard of. I really came to appreciate this woman. She was 18 years old. She grew up in Beaumont, kind of a tomboy, and was really great in basketball, high school basketball. She was spotted by the competition manager of a Dallas company called Employers Casualty. Employers Casualty, as with many other large companies, were fielding competitive sports teams. It gave them a reputation as being healthy and outgoing, and they had a basketball team that was always the bridesmaid, never the bride, and that is, they'd never won a national title. So they brought this woman, Babe Didrikson, 18-year-old girl, up to become a $75 a month typist for Employers Casualty. She couldn't type, but it really didn't matter. They wanted her to play basketball, and she did. From the start, she outpointed every other, the Employers Casualty team outpointed any other team they played. They went on to win a national championship, and she was high point woman all season. After a second winning season, the president of the company said, you know, maybe we ought to explore track and field and field a team. So the sports coordinator kind of brought the women together. There were other women there, and said, you know, we're thinking about that. What sports do you think you might like to, sports do you think you might like to compete in? Hurdle, one of them said, shot put, high jump. Babe said, I'll do them all. And they kind of laughed at her. She was a big talker anyway. But she, living out of an apartment in Oak Cliff, would go down to Kidd Park and throw broomsticks, throw anything, and flat irons, just to practice and to learn what it meant to do track and field. She began to compete and developed a pretty good regional reputation. She won an AAU tournament as a one-person team. The company sent her to Chicago for the AAU tournament against teams with 20 girls on them, and she won as she outpointed them all with one person. She knew all and that won her a spot to go to the Olympics, the 1932 Olympics that were held in Los Angeles that year. It was a time, and here's again where technology comes in. It was a time when there began to be developed national sports writers. Every newspaper had its own sports writer, talking about local sports, but there were national people that began to, and one of the ones was Grantland Rice. Grantland Rice spotted Babe in that early tournament and became kind of her mentor of how to operate. She went to the Olympics, and this was only the second year they allowed women in the Olympics, and they were allowed only 3 events, limited to 3 events. She entered the 3 events and won 2 golds and a silver, and put the United States in as the top Olympic team, women's Olympic team in the country. You may know her as You may know her in her later life. To make a living in sports, she ended up marrying a professional wrestler named George Zaharias. You may be familiar with Babe Zaharias. Babe Zaharias was a co-founder of the LPGA, and even today, when they talk about the finest woman athlete of the 20th century, she tops every list. She was an all-round athlete. She was a spunky person, and just a quick story. She was known to out-hit on a golf course. She was known to outdrive most of her male competitors. And one of them asked, how do you drive 250, 300 yards every time? She says, honey, sometimes you just have to hitch up your girdle and go for it. And she did. She died early, but she's just a sweet, smart woman who became known as the Texas Babe. Babe Zaharias, welcome back to Dallas, made her reputation as the Texas Babe and the best sports person, woman athlete of the 20th century. Now here are two guys that you know, but you rarely see them together. Amon Carter and Bob Thornton. Amon Carter was publisher of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. R.L. Thornton, Robert Thornton, was a banker and civic leader here in Dallas. And if you've heard the stories and read the stories of Dallas and Fort Worth being like that, those were the two generals of that. It was said, probably true, that Amon Carter would not come to Dallas for a meeting without bringing his own lunch. He would not leave $1 with a Dallas restaurant. He'd bring a sack lunch. And R.L. Thornton may have been a little more subtle. He had a sign on his office wall that said, Fort Worth passports available here. He also spoke with a person who was looking, I think it was Ford, who was looking to build a plant in either Dallas or Fort Worth. And in making his rounds, the Ford person said to Thornton, now, why don't you tell me one good thing, one reason that I ought to go to Fort Worth? What's one good thing about Fort Worth? Thornton thought about it and he said, best thing about Fort Worth is that they got a train leaving there every 30 minutes going east to Dallas. It turned out both Dallas and Fort Worth got the Ford plant. But it's 1934, and the Texas legislature is slow on deciding what the state ought to do for its centennial of becoming a republic. They decide only late that they ought to have one central centennial celebration. The rest of the towns can do their own thing and they'll finance them, but the state ought to have one central exposition. But where? Well, San Antonio or Houston, one of the other. Got to be fair. Let's put out bid packages to the 4 largest cities in the state: San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, and Fort Worth. Now we know San Antonio or Houston will do it because of their attachment to the history. Dallas wasn't even a city then. Fort Worth knew the same, and they were the smallest. So the mayor of Fort Worth just dropped the bid package. He didn't even bother to bid, put it in the trash can. A committee was formed, a legislative committee, to go around to the different locations to decide they looked over the presentation package and decide who was going to get the central centennial. They went first to San Antonio, and if you've ever dealt with any of the San Antonio matrons there, you know the kind of attitude. It was, well, we'll welcome you here, but be sure to clean up after yourselves, and be sure not to mess up our park too much. But yeah, the Alamo is here, and we'll have some rules for it, but okay. They go to Houston, talk to the Houston mayor, who says, okay, come to Houston. We've got lots of buildings, places for you to go. We'll do whatever's necessary. And, there's San Jacinto here. We're named after Sam Houston. And how much money is the legislature going to put up? Well, they say the legislature can't be counted on for anything. How much are you willing to put up? He said, we're not going to put up any money. If we pay for the exposition, it'd be a Houston exposition, not a Texas exposition. So, consider us, but we're not going to have much to put up for that. They finally go up to Dallas, and there is R.L. Thornton, who has brought together elements of the community to already put together architectural drawings, a model of what the grounds will look like. He tours them through the State Fair Park. He said, we've had 30 years of experience running a state fair here, and we have the open space, here are all the drawings. And besides, we're putting up $9 million just as earnest money to fund it. And we'll self-fund the rest of the amount. Well, the legislators are just, the committee is just kind of gobsmacked by it all. And one of them, as they're leaving the park, kind of turns back and says, Mr. Thornton, are you going to have an esplanade to welcome people in like the White City, like Chicago and the White City? You got an esplanade? I tell you, Thornton says, we're going to have the biggest esplanade you've ever seen, a Texanic esplanade. Huge. Oh, that's good. As the guy walks away, Thornton turns around to one of his aides and says, what the hell's an esplanade? So, but you got it right outside the door there. Dallas is announced as the winner, and will host and it's a surprise to everybody. Not the least of which is Amon Carter. It's said that when the phone call comes to Amon that Dallas had gotten the exposition, he broke his own record of consecutive goddams. God damn. He was not pleased at all. So he instantly went out and began to look for a way to compete with Dallas. He hired Billy Rose, a Broadway producer. If you've ever seen Funny Lady, he's Fanny Bryce's husband and a Broadway producer, fast-talking little short guy. And he had been successful with a big theater production called Jumbo. Amon Carter said, bring Jumbo down. Hired him for $1,000 a day for 100 days to come down and plan out the Fort Worth Fiesta exposition. It ended up being huge for Fort Worth. They built a Western Street. They had a rodeo bar. The rodeo bar had, the backstop would come up, and there would be a group of 5 little ladies, each weighing in excess of 350 pounds, doing dance numbers and singing there on the bar. Amazing to see. They brought in Sally Rand. Sally Rand did her, in fact, they had an area called Sally Rand Nude Ranch. It wasn't really nude, but it was close. It was a good place for the guys to get away while the kids, and they had the production of Jumbo in its own building, and they built the world's largest dinner theater called Casa Mañana there. Casa Mañana is nothing like that little aluminum pimple that you see in Fort Worth today. It's Casa Mañana seated 4,500 people. It had a stage, it had a water, it had a lagoon in front of the stage, full orchestra. It was a dinner theater. They brought in Jack Benny, Bob Hope, high-end talent there to compete with Dallas. Now, Dallas's idea of the exposition was that it be educational about the future of Texas. We're not going to celebrate the past, Thornton said. We're going to celebrate the future. We're going to show people air conditioning. We're going to show people what we've done over the years and what's coming up. Machinery and the agricultural strength of Texas, and we're going to reach out and bring people in, a lot of people in from out of state. And they did, and the 2 competitive fairs ran. Dallas's was a lot more staid, and well, Fort Worth came up with the theme of go to Dallas for education, come to Fort Worth for fun. And a lot of people chose to do that. In fact, Billy Rose and Amon Carter had a sign built. Oh, here's Dallas's, the big esplanade. Very formal, very nice, celebrating Texas. By contrast, there's Fort Worth. And they at Fort Worth erected a sign just on those buildings across Exposition there, that you see just right in front of the entrance, saying "Wild Whoopee, Fort Worth Frontier," just 45 minutes west. And now the fairs ran for the expositions ran for all of the summer of '36. Ended up in the fall, and neither of them made money. But together, they brought 9 million new people to Texas, seeing Texas for the first time, and amazed that it wasn't cowboys, cactus, and cattle, that it was people, it was industry, it was business, it was fun. It changed, well, some say that that's when the rest of the country met Texas. If you're a football fan, you know this next guy, especially if you're a TCU fan. Sammy Baugh. Slingin' Sammy came from West Texas, and he had practiced baseball, football. He had an arm. He had a great arm. He got a scholarship to TCU just about the time Dutch Meyer came in. And Dutch Meyer, as a coach and athletic director, Dutch Meyer was tired of TCU being an also-ran in football and being run over by SMU. So he was looking for a different way to play. At the time, a forward pass was not gentlemanly. A forward pass was if you bobbled the ball, maybe you threw it to someone around you. But hey, take it like a man. Go down with the ball. Don't throw it away. But there was no rule against a forward pass at all. So Dutch Meyer put together an offense that involved stringing the whole line out wide. It was so wide that Baugh said later, the guys on either ends were up in the stands selling soft drinks. It was that wide. But Sammy Baugh would pass short, quick passes to one of those guys for 10 yards, 12 yards, and just ate it up. No long show off anything at the time, just there was no defensing it. Nobody had seen anything like it. And as a result, TCU really became a powerhouse in football. Their first, Sammy Baugh's final year, they tied for the Southwest Conference Championship with Fort Worth only because TCU had a tie on one of their games instead of a win. And they didn't go to the Cotton Bowl, SMU did, but actually SMU went to the Rose Bowl and just got whomped. But TCU went to the Sugar Bowl and just romped all over LSU. Those were some of the first games that were broadcast. They were broadcast by radio, and people heard them. People heard the name Sammy Baugh. Humble Oil and Refining, what's now ExxonMobil, Humble Oil and Refining, for years sponsored radio broadcasts of Southwest Conference football, starting with the excitement that Sammy Baugh brought to it. He became known nationally when he was drafted by the new team in Washington, D.C., the new Washington Redskins. So this team had moved from Boston, an unsuccessful team, had moved to Washington, and Sammy Baugh was their rookie quarterback. As rookie quarterback that first year, he took them to the NFL championship, beating Chicago in that first year. And again, Sammy Baugh won a national reputation. Today, the NFL will describe him as the man who weaponized the forward pass. And he played successful football before retiring to his ranch in West Texas. Early Cotton Bowl, by the way. You've heard of this man, I'm sure. In fact, you heard of him before. The young man who went to Amherst, that was Stanley Marcus. And he wrote about that trip of trying to tell people about Texas in his biography, Minding the Store. But Stanley Marcus had come back from college. He got an MBA from Harvard, came back from college, and his dad gave him progressive responsibility at the store. By 1939, he was pretty much, by 1938, he was pretty much running the store, although he consulted often with his dad. He was frustrated, though, again, by that early experience, because people wouldn't recognize the fine things that he was doing with Neiman Marcus. I mean, in Dallas, it was popular, but the designers wouldn't consider Neiman Marcus for trunk shows or even what people wore in Texas. They were Paris and New York. Fabrics and styles were different there than they were here. Seasons were different here. And the designers, they didn't care. It was anything west of the Hudson. It just was not of interest to them. There was the Centennial Exposition that went on, and Stanley Marcus said, the Centennial Exposition, and then that first radio broadcast of the Academy Awards, where they all came up and got their awards there, kind of clicked with me. And he said, you know, we're going to have a fashion exposition here, a national fashion exposition. But the thing is, if you, as a designer, are awarded something, you got to come to Dallas to pick up your award during the fashion exposition. Oh, we'll treat you right. We'll show off your items. We'll have a big show, but we'll treat you right. And it worked. He brought in initially 14 major designers that came, along with editors from Vogue and Women's Wear Daily, other fashion publications. And they began to look at the Dallas woman. In fact, Stanley made sure that there was a Dallas woman. He didn't use runway models, regular runway models. He used Dallas housewives for his show. He also had mannequins made that fit the measurements of more of the Dallas woman, not the slim little lady going to an office in New York, but a real Dallas woman, and introduced them to the fabrics and the colors and the styles that the women needed in a Sunbelt city. So his initial fashion show was a big event, and in fact, there's Stanley with women that are just that are local women. The other photograph is of a designer named Jacques Fath, and he wasn't at that first one, but later when he came, he fell in love with Texas. He was from Paris, hardly spoke English, but he loved it. He went designed a line of Western wear for Parisians. And it was kind of funny. That's what he's wearing there. It's kind of funny, but he did pretty well for a while with his Western wear for Parisians. Are we getting on time? Okay. I'm going to introduce you quickly to a woman that you've never heard of. Her name is Enid Justin. You may have known her last name. She came from the Justin boot family, but when the brothers moved the boot company to Fort Worth, she said, "We're staying here. I'm gonna open up my own boot company," and so she operated. She ran Nocona Boot Factory, Nocona Boot Company, in Nocona, Texas. She had good retail distribution, but her brothers were outdoing her. They were deadly competitors. In fact, there was a split in the family that never healed. They were deadly competitors. She didn't have enough retail outlets in cities that should be busier, and that was in New Mexico, Arizona, and California. So Enid sponsored and announced in 1939 the world's longest horse race. And that was going to be an overland race from Dallas to San Francisco. A style race where you only have 2 horses. You got to stay on your horse. You got to stay on horses. You can't drive anywhere. You can trailer one horse to the other and Pony Express them off. But it's got to be all horseback. And it's got to be overland. You gotta get there. We're going to start, and I think they signed up 25 people to make the run. 15 left, and you see her at the starting line there on March 1, 1938, and she's ready for the signal to start the race. And here are the guys running down on the race. 21 days to get to San Francisco. And in fact, they were aiming at the San Francisco exposition that was going on there. 21 days. And as they went, newspapers began to write about the competitors of who's ahead and who's not. And this race, these guys are still going. They're crossing the desert now. Will they come out okay? Are they all gonna, and from that stretch into Phoenix, the Phoenix paper had a big thing about a lottery about who's gonna show up first, who's gonna be in Phoenix first, and then across the hills to California, through Los Angeles to Malibu, and up the coast. They're close to being neck and neck. And the one who was riding second, unfortunately, an Oxnard was hit by an automobile, and his horse went down. He was not injured, but his horse was. And he had to drop out of the race, and the winner was the man on the left. National headlines allowed him, the prize, by the way, which he claimed, was a hat filled with 750 silver dollars minted in San Francisco. So that was his prize. And what Enid wanted really was the publicity. She got it in the newspapers for the race, which led to an invitation to visit the movie studios in California, in Southern California. So she and the winner of the race went down to Hollywood and were hosted around. She didn't want to meet the Clark Gables and the others. She wanted to meet the cowboys. And as she did, she talked to the wranglers, the stunt men, the ones that really worked the horses, and told them about Nocona boot. It had a particular type of heel to it that worked well with a working cowboy. And she opened up a number of retail outlets there because of that. And today, if you look at some of those 40s and 50s cowboy movies and know what to look for, you'll see the Nocona Boot Company heel on a lot of those posses that are riding, or the rustlers that are going. There's a great museum there that celebrates her. And there's an audio animatronic figure of Enid in that museum that's a little bit spooky. She will sit in a chair across from you and at some point will stand up and tell you about the race and tell you about what she did to make boots. And all you want to do is go, yes, ma'am. I'm going to cut back for a minute to Boyce House, the Horn Frog guy. In 1940, this is another thing that affected Texas. In 1940, Boyce House was hired because of his books about oil. He was hired to go to Hollywood to be the technical advisor for the movie Boomtown with Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, said to be the best oil movie of all. And that was him as technical advisor. You're going to know this next guy too, and I'm going to tell you real quick because I tend to get kind of emotional about him. Audie Murphy was the son of a sharecropper. He had, his dad left home early, his mom died. He was trying to take care of his siblings. They lived in Hunt County, in various places around Hunt County, doing sharecropping. For a while, they lived in an abandoned boxcar, but he had to feed his family. He had to go out with a .22 and kill rabbits or squirrels or whatever he could do to help feed his brothers and sisters. But you know that he enlisted eventually in the Army. He was actually 17 years old when he enlisted. And he fought through most of North Africa, through Italy, southern France, up to the border with Germany. One of the few that made it all the way through the Eastern Theater of Operations. But he earned a reputation. And in January of 1945, he stood atop a burning tank and by himself, using the gun that was on top of the tank, held off a company of Germans and a few small tanks to get his men back into the woods and protected. For that, he earned a Congressional Medal of Honor. And for that, once they began totaling it up, Audie Murphy, they realized, was the most decorated soldier of World War II. Here he was, 19 years old. I mean, he looks like a Boy Scout waiting for his next merit badge. 19 years old. Audie Murphy appears on the cover of Life magazine. He is such a kid looking, and it's such a time in history that people were wanting their boys to come home, and they all thought about Audie Murphy. He became the stand-in for the brothers and fathers that couldn't come back, and that was him. I've got one more. That I want to tell you about real quick, and I'm going to make this quickly. Glenn McCarthy was a wildcatter. Glenn McCarthy, if you are from Houston or have been around Houston, made millions of dollars, and he built the big Shamrock Hotel that was there at the time. Glenn McCarthy, when he opened the Shamrock, now he's an Irishman, called it the Shamrock Hotel. When he opened it, it was a bacchanal. There were drunks everywhere. It lasted we had Hollywood people in. There were drunks everywhere. He was staggering around. It was amazing. Betty Davis was there. She went out to the highway to hitchhike back to Hollywood. That was the only way she could get back to all these. Glenn McCarthy built the hotel. He was known as America's wildcatter, and went through that big back. If that story sounds familiar, it's because you may have seen Giant. Jet Rink is said to be modeled after Glenn McCarthy, oilman Glenn McCarthy. Big money, drunk in the hotel, if you remember the last scene from the movie. That was Glenn McCarthy. Well, these Texans helped establish a reputation that still percolates in the American culture. We still are beneficiaries of this. And it starts young. This summer, or last summer, there's a little girl in Fort Worth that their parents sent her to Missouri to spend a couple of weeks with a favorite aunt. And that aunt lived on a kind of a farm, took the daughter walking around, her niece walking around and showing off and the crops and the sky. Look how bright it is, the stars. And you see the moon, that quarter moon up there. The girl looked up and said, "Aunt Helen, in Texas, we have a whole moon." And so again, we have that reputation. Every one of you should be proud of it, of being loud, proud, and brash. Thank you very much.